Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University.
This episode is part of our series on the science of sport performance. I'm Stuart McErlain-Naylor and I'm joined by Dr Andrew Butterworth, who is the Head of Performance Analysis for the Loughborough Lightning Netball Super League team and also a university teacher in Applied Performance Analysis at Loughborough University. Hi Andrew, welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast.
Hi Stu, thanks very much for having me.
No worries. So you are the Head of Performance Analysis at Loughborough Lightning in the Netball Super League. For the benefit of our listeners, what does that actually mean?
So what it means is me using a variety of exciting technologies and lots of different methodologies to better understand sporting performances from a tactical and a technical perspective. I think, as we all know, there can be a lot of opinions in sport, a lot of biases, both from the media and fans, but also within the sport as well, from coaches and support staff. So what I do is to try and make that more objective. And I use performance analysis as an objective science built around data and built around numbers to try and better understand what goes on in sport, to try and understand why that happens, and then ultimately to try and get a better outcome at the end of it and hopefully win our next match or try and improve our performances moving forward. So it's a really exciting role. It allows me to tell a story of a match or a training session, but it's critically through an objective lens. So we're trying to remove bias, to remove opinion, and really get down to the facts of what's happened.
Interesting. So why, well, I guess with netball specifically, what's different about that compared to any other sport? What makes it such an interesting task, really, for you as a performance analyst?
Yeah, so netball is really unique in that it's a seven-a-side territorial game. It's an invasion sport played with a single ball. It's really high scoring, which brings challenges in itself. Whereas if we compare it to a football where you have 0-0s or 1-0s fairly regularly, netball, both teams will score in excess of 50 goals plus per game comfortably. So that in itself brings a lot to look at. But the really unique thing about netball is the positional restrictions. So those 7 players on the court at any one time all have a different position, and they can all go in different areas of the court. So not all 7 can go everywhere on the court. There are restrictions which fundamentally drive and change the role of that player on the court. And that gives a lot of different things for me to look at as the performance analyst and to try and better understand. And it also creates this really rich web of interactions between players, and how they interact with each other is, again, something tactically that is really exciting to analyse, because it gives us lots of options to try and better understand what's happening and who plays best with who and what the opposition are doing and their best combinations. So it gives us a really great opportunity to understand that in a lot of detail. But it also, of course, given the unique nature of it, generates a lot of work and generates a lot of different insights we've got to try to uncover.
We've had a really brief overview of performance analysis, netball itself, and then the final bit of your job title is Netball Super League. What's the Netball Super League?
So the Netball Super League is the elite netball competition in this country, in the United Kingdom. That involves a number of teams around the country who play against each other in a league format. And at the end of the season, the top 4 teams will play off to become the overall champions of the league. So it's a really exciting competition that's grown in stature. It's grown in terms of the investment into the sport as well. I've been involved in netball for about 13, 14 years now. And in that time of working in the Super League, it's changed considerably to where it is today, with great broadcast coverage, really good exposure and great marketing, and the crowds have grown massively as well. So it's a really exciting league, and it's a great one to be involved in and to use my analysis expertise.
So 13, 14 years in the Netball Super League. If we go back 13 or 14 years then, how did this all come about? Tell me a bit more about, I guess, your background, how you've ended up at Loughborough Lightning as head of performance analysis, but also I know you have a teaching role within the university as well. So how have you ended up in a dual role of teaching and performance analysis at the university?
So if I go back to where it all started by accident, and I'm very glad that I got out of bed one Thursday morning and turned up to a 9 a.m. lecture. So when I was an undergrad student, I was doing the sport coaching module, and one Thursday morning, 9 a.m., we had a guest lecturer come in from Watford Football Club, who was a performance analyst, and he gave an overview of what is analysis and what do I do in my job role at Watford and those kind of things. And it was from there that everything sparked for me. Up until that point, I'd never heard of performance analysis. I hadn't, for obvious reasons, then considered it as a job role. And that's where everything went from. So at the end of that session, the speaker gave some opportunities for those interested to get involved a bit more. To go and do some initial voluntary work. So I did some of that at Watford Ladies Football Club, which was great and a really good experience. But also at the same time, the Super League netball team, who were based at my university in Hertfordshire, were then called the Hertfordshire Mavericks. And they were looking for someone to come and be pretty much their first analyst, to start coming in and videoing their games and collecting some data on it. So I went along to that pretty clueless about netball, knowing very, very little about the sport, and so had a very steep learning curve. Did a lot of background reading and watched a bit on YouTube to try and get used to what the sport was. It turned out I really enjoyed it. I started to develop my skills as an analyst, and things went from there really. So very glad I did turn up to that session. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't be sat here and chatting to you today. But it was a really exciting journey. I went on to work for the England netball team. So I worked with Mavericks for 3 years and then was the head of analysis for the England national team for 4 years, which was amazing. Lots of great memories and travel to different countries and competitions in that. And then fast forward again, I came to Loughborough and I was asked by one of the coaches to come and to lead the analysis provision here. And I think I'm right in saying now I'm into my 8th or possibly even my 9th season with Lightning now. So I've been here quite a while in that head of performance analysis role for Super League. And similar story really on the academic is I never had in mind to be an academic or to be a lecturer, but a really cool opportunity came about at the same time when I went to go to England Netball. So they funded my PhD. So I was the analyst for the England Netball team, as mentioned, but also then doing the research work alongside that for my PhD. And then out the back of that, a job came up at the University of Derby at the perfect time as I was finishing my PhD. It was a lecturing role in analysis and I couldn't turn it down really because it meant I could carry on being an analyst practically, which was so important to me and continues to be. So I went and did that for 6 years and then the job at Loughborough just about 2 years ago now came up and been really enjoying that and great opportunity to combine both skill sets to try and improve analysis overall.
Brilliant. So if we stick with the present day then now, at Loughborough in this dual teaching and analysis role, I'm really keen to get a bit more of an understanding around the typical day or typical week of a performance analyst in elite sport. So if we say kind of hypothetically, you've got a big match at the weekend, talk me through that week, kind of what are you doing? Are you doing anything during the week in the build up to that match? And then I guess as we go through, what you're doing on match day, what you're doing kind of pre, during, after the match. But yeah, I guess to start with, keep it simple. If you know what opposition you've got at the weekend, you know the players that are available from your team, what does your job involve in the build up to that big match?
Yeah, so there's lots of different work goes on and lots of different processes. Overall, as kind of a headline, we work in 3 phases. So we work in our pre-match phase, our live match phase, and then our post-match phase as well. So pre-match, if we've got a game next weekend against a certain opposition, then the first thing I do is meet with our head coach. So meet with our head coach, Vic Burgess, and we start to have a conversation about, well, what do we already know about this team and what are we expecting them to do? And that part of the process is quite subjective, which goes against everything I said in the introduction when I was talking about performance analysis being very an objective science. But that first expert part, our opinions into that and our knowledge of the opposition is really critical, because data can tell us a lot and does tell us a lot, but it can't replace people's knowledge in intricate detail about an opposition and about a team. And that's such an important part of being a performance analyst, is having that lens on it as well. So in that initial chat, we'll talk about what we already know and what we're expecting. And then as part of that conversation, I'll bring our database into it. So I've created a database over the last 7 or 8 years working in Super League, which has collated a consistent block of indicators from every single match that has happened in that 7 or 8 year period for both teams, home and away, which has built us up an incredible database to tell us what teams actually do and what the data tells us they're really strong on and what they're not so strong on as well, and perhaps where we can exploit them. So after we've had that subjective part of the conversation, we then look at the objective data. Does this actually match up to what we've just been talking about? And that gives us a more objective approach then to it, and it helps to align our focus on what we need to put in. When we've done that, we go to the video and we start to pull some examples out. So we've got a system or a piece of software in performance analysis called Huddle, huddle.com. And that is a web-based platform that gives me, as the analyst of Lightning, access to the video of every other game in the league, and also some basic coding of the other teams in the league as well. So rather than me having to travel around the country and film every single game myself, we've got this central resource which we can pull down, and then we can start to actually look at the video itself. So we will probably look at 2 to 3 opposition games before we play them. I'll look at them. The coach, Vic, or our assistant coach, Olivia Murphy, will look at them as well. But sometimes we'll ask the players to, and we'll put a little bit of responsibility on them also in our pre-match phase and say, look, guys, what do you know? What are you seeing? What do we need to prepare for within that as well? So when we've got all that information together, my job is then to package it into a pre-match pack, which is a 5-minute video, which contains information about the squad, about who we're expecting to start in their starting 7, some key data trends. So we might know that a particular team are really strong on defending the shot, for example, and limiting our own shooting percentage. And we need our players to know that so they can be prepared for that. So that kind of information will be within our pre-match pack. And then it will be filled with video examples as well to bring it to life for the players. That then goes out to them, usually 48 hours before the game, on WhatsApp. So we do it in the way that they can access it most readily. And we're all on WhatsApp for a significant proportion of our days. So we put it out to the players on there and engage with them that way. And then they've got it available to them to watch as and when they need to in the lead up to the game. So lots of homework goes on in getting ready for the opposition and putting that information out. And then the final part of the pre-match is training. So having got that information and knowing what the opposition are likely to do tactically, we then strategize what we want to do to counteract that within the game, and we'll go practice that within training. And a really cool and exciting part of my role in training is that we can do a live video replay. So with, you imagine players are all on court, they've done a drill or they've been through maybe a centre pass practice. About 5 to 10 seconds after that finishes, down on the touchline on a big screen, the players have got a video replay of that so we can discuss exactly what's just happened. We can use some drawing and telestration tools to bring that to life a little bit more. and we can have some really critical discussions around that. So it really means that we can get into some great detail in the moment, live, and try and change something there and then, rather than waiting until the game happens, until arguably it's a little bit too late.
Then going into the match, kind of, I guess, the bridge between that pre and live phase, how does that work, I guess, on the day or, leading up to the match itself? Do you have kind of meetings with players? Do you have pre-match objectives for players? Is it kind of objectives at a team level, objectives at a group of positional players level, individual player objectives? Is that something that's been communicated with them throughout? Is that led by the coaches, led by the players, led by yourselves? How does that all work, kind of leading out of everything you've learned about the opposition and your own team, then building into match day itself and the first whistle?
Yeah, so once the pre-match pack has gone out and we've been in training and we've been discussing those, we'll continue to have both formal and informal conversations with the players. How we do that varies. Sometimes it will be one-to-one level. Sometimes it will be as a whole group, or sometimes unit as well. So either just the attack or just the defence. And we'll continue to have conversations with them about how we approach the game and what we want to achieve from it. In terms of targets, we've got targets that we set for players both individually and then again the team overall. So we know what it takes to win a netball game. We know, based on that huge database, of how likely we are to win a game if we hit X percentage in a certain statistic. The players are all aware of that and they know what it takes to win that game of netball. And so we set them that before the game. The important thing in that is that we have to be really aware of the opposition, though, because it's probably not fair of us to set the same target when we're playing a really strong team, a team who's battling at the top of the league, as opposed to a team who's battling at the bottom of the league, because there's a difference in strength of that opposition. So it wouldn't really be fair of us to set the same target in the same area that they're trying to hit, given there is such a difference in the opposition. So, for example, centre pass attack is one of the key things in netball. Is can we convert our own centre passes through to a goal? If we're playing a team nearer the bottom of the league, we'll be looking for our team to hit 85% of those centre passes going through to a goal, because we know that the defence is probably a little bit weaker on that team. If we play a team at the top of the league, that number will drop slightly to around about 75%, which we would be comfortable and happy with as a target, bearing in mind that the opposition defence is a lot stronger. And of course, that's going to restrict what we can do. So we do set those targets, but we've got to be really cognizant of the opposition and other contextual factors around it, so that we can make it as fair as possible, ultimately.
And then building on from that, the match starts. Do you just sit back, enjoy the match and let them get on with it? Or do you have any control or any say over things? What are you doing on match day, and kind of what can you do to try and help people meet those targets?
It would certainly be a lot of a less stressful experience if I sat back and sipped a cup of coffee during. But no, I've got a really cool role on a match day. So traditionally, a performance analyst on a match day will either be filming or coding, as we call it. Coding is as events happen in the game. Using our software that we've got on our technology, we notate each event as it happens, and that builds our data and starts to tell that story. So typically analysts will do that. I'm in a really fortunate position whereby I've got a really great team around me that do that, which actually means to a certain extent the pressure's off me, because I'm not live filming or doing that coding. But actually what I'm doing instead is interpreting that information in real time and then communicating it back to the players and coaches in real time as well. So if you see me on a match day, I'll be up on the gantry or the balcony looking probably like I'm not doing a lot, but internally there's a lot going on and there's a lot of thoughts whizzing through my brain. That is me watching the game and trying to relate what we talked about in pre-match and seeing if that is actually happening in reality. So I'm interpreting the data. So I will have one laptop next to me, which has got a live video stream on and also a stream of statistics of the game as well. So I'm taking the objective information plus that expert subjective part that I mentioned a little bit earlier on, and trying to ascertain what is happening and what do we need to do more of or less of in comparison to what we're actually seeing out there on court. Sometimes it's nice and straightforward and the opposition are doing exactly what we thought they would. Our tactical strategies are working really well and we don't have to intervene too much. But of course, at times teams will throw a curveball in, they'll play a different player we weren't expecting, or they'll play in a different tactical role from what we were expecting. And we have to be agile and responsive to that. If we were to only look at that post game, it could be too late. So my role in a game is to try and intervene earlier if needed and try and make tweaks to that tactical plan alongside our coaches. So I'm in constant communication with the coaches. We're radioed up throughout the game. You'll see me with my AirPods walking around. That's unfortunately not me listening to Spotify. It's on the radio down to Vic or to Liv, and we're talking about what we're seeing. And it works both ways. I can say to them, look, I've seen this. Are you guys aware of it? What do we need to do? Do we need to change something? And equally, they can come back to me and say, look, what are you seeing, Andrew? Is there any input you've got? Or we have spotted this. Are you seeing that too? So it's a conversation that we have, which allows us to really get into the depth. And then the final part of the live in-match stuff is half time. So we get 12 minutes strict at half time. I will run down, literally with my laptop in arm, and I'll probably have 5 or 6 key video clips ready to show the team, based on what I've seen and the conversations we've had with the coaches. That might be individual. So sometimes I'll go to an individual player and say, look, this is what we need you to do more of or less of. Sometimes it'll be a whole team. In which case we'll pop it on the big screen, and we'll deliver that back at half time, all with the view of trying to change something and intervene a little bit earlier on, and to allow us to make things better. So yeah, that's the role. It's a really exciting one. It is pressured. There's a lot going on, but it's a really cool one that hopefully helps us to be more successful.
I think it's a much bigger role than even big netball fans might imagine. And when you're talking about that kind of live verbal communication with coaches on the bench, when you're talking about being in there at half time, showing video clips, I think a lot of that is potentially the side of the role that people might not be aware is actually happening. So it's really interesting to hear you communicate that. I'm wondering as well, as the match is going on, you've mentioned having your AirPods in, communicating with the bench. Is that the only form of communication between you, or are they on the bench? Do they have access to the live stats? Do they have video footage? You know, are they watching video replays on the bench? Are they seeing the same stats that you've got on your laptop? How does that work?
Yeah, exactly that. So down on the bench, the coaches have got 2 devices, usually one laptop, one MacBook and one iPad, but sometimes it can be 2 iPads. One of those iPads has that live data stream on, so the coaches see exactly what I'm seeing data-wise, or a slightly condensed version of that. So they themselves can make more objective interpretations about what's going on. And that's all split into quarters. So we might have a really good first quarter, but then we drop off a cliff with our centre pass attack maybe in the second quarter, and that's obviously not great. So the coaches and the players down on the bench can see that, and they can interpret that themselves to help them understand the game and the story of how it's developing throughout. So they can see that. Variety of different indicators on there around our possessions, our shooting, and a couple of other parts on there as well, which really help us understand how the game's going, and also of the opposition as well. So it's not just our own data that's down there live, it's the opposition as well. So we can see that maybe their turnover attack is really, really poor today. And that's something that we can take advantage of. And that data is all down there. The other device is in the video. So there's a second device down there which has got a stream of the video. It works on somewhere between a 10 to 15 second delay it takes to get the video stream down there. So if they want to watch something back, or there's a certain incident they want to watch back, they can do that. And it's a really easy to use software where the players, coaches can operate that themselves. In other sports, football especially now, you'll see on Match of the Day when there's iPads all around the dugout, that is the same system, the same software that we use to make that happen. So that's evolved massively in sport in general, not just netball, over the last few years. The last 2 to 3 years especially, that use of live video and live data on the bench has really evolved. And it's pretty commonplace now, and you see that in most environments out there.
We carry on with that a bit more then, about how technology's evolved. Kind of, if you've been involved in the Netball Super League for, I think you said 13, 14 years earlier, how does the situation you've just described compare to maybe your first season with Mavericks? You know, from a technology perspective, or even your role, how does it differ? How has it advanced? Did it kind of change instantly, or has it been a gradual thing? Yeah, and how has that changed really over time?
Yeah, the role itself has changed hugely, and that is largely in line or in parallel with the technology, as that has developed massively as well over the last decade or so. So when I started out at Mavericks, we were burning DVDs. So the way that players and coaches got their footage was post-game. I would take one copy, the master copy of the DVD. I would then insert 15 or 16 blank DVDs in this huge bulky device, a DVD burner, and it would take, I can't remember, probably 2 to 3 hours to burn individual DVD copies for the players and coaches. I would then post those out to the players, and they'd receive it, 2-3 days after the game, and they'd be able to watch it back. So that was a very different process from where we are now. Where we are now is performance analysis as a really technologically rich discipline area of sports science. And within moments of the game finishing, it will be up on our online huddle.com platform, fully coded with every event broken down within that game, ready for the players to view on their laptops, their iPads, their phones, however they want to watch it, it will be there and it'll be ready to go for them. So it means the speed of analysis is completely different from what it used to be, whereas previously it would take me a couple of days to get everything to players and to coaches. Now it's literally a couple of moments and it's up there. Before they've cooled down and showered and eaten, it's up there and ready for them to go to start reviewing the match as and when they need to. So to enable all that, there's huge amounts of technology involved now. I used to rock up to a game with a tripod, a camera, an old memory card, and a really slow old laptop. That's completely changed now. So hardware-wise now, I take 2 cameras to every game. I take 3 laptops to every game, 3 MacBooks to every game. 2 of those stay up on the gantry. So one is the master machine where the live video feed goes into, and one of my team code the game up on that. The second one is the review station that I use to clip stuff up and look at the data in game. And then that's the one I run down with at half time. And then the third Mac goes down onto the bench. That's the one we mentioned before the coaches are using. And then there's an iPad that goes down as well. So loads and loads of hardware. We've also got some really cool wireless technology. So to enable everything to happen down on the bench, we use some high-end internet routers and some extender cubes. So we will sometimes play in big venues So our opening game this year was the Motorpoint Arena in Nottingham, kind of 12,000 people in, I think it was. That doesn't work well with wireless signals. So we had to invest in some really high-end boosters for that to enable everything to work still. That's not to mention the GPS side of things, which I've not touched on yet today. So we also have Catapult GPS on every player at every game to track their physical movements in the moment. That comes with us to every game as well. So I rock up to every venue, home and away, with 4 wheelie Pelly cases, my backpack and a couple of other bags as well. Looks like I'm moving house every time I go to a netball game. Loads of different hardware, and then lots of software as well. Mentioned a couple of them already to make it all happen. So performance analysis has become a lot more technologically driven. We're lucky that the increases in computer power has helped us with that, and the technologies have been adopted by PA. But certainly a few years ago, it was a very different story, and a lot more manual work involved to achieve our analysis outcomes.
And where do you think it will be in another 10 years then, if we see how much it's changed since burning individual DVDs and posting them out to players? Where do you think it'll be in a few more years, if you had to guess?
So there's a lot of automation and AI coming into seemingly everywhere, all parts of our lives at the minute, and sport performance analysis are no different. There are lots of exciting camera systems now which automatically track the ball for you, which takes away that manual data collection part, which is really exciting. And we've got a couple of technologies that we are trialing with that, and that have been really exciting for us to look at. That's one thing which is really great, because it removes the need, if they are in all venues we go to, for us to physically film it ourselves. But that is a problem in that not all venues are going to have that. And whilst there are some mobile versions of these technologies evolving, they're probably a couple of years away still from being consistently available for every venue. The other part of it, which is really growing and adapting as well, is the coding, whereby now some companies are able, again through AI, their technology can actually code the game for you. It recognizes what is happening in game and it does that for you, which again takes away that manual data collection of the events. That said, in netball, that is a long, long way off still, because it's not a really mainstream sport and it's not having lots of attention paid to it. It is definitely lagging behind. Whereas in football, especially, there are systems which are pretty reliable now at doing that and coding events in the game. What I would say as well, though, is all this automation could be great and is time saving in some respects, but it should never take over entirely. And ultimately, AI isn't smart enough and never will be smart enough to completely take over. And going back to our very first opening of this podcast, we talked about that expert opinion from coaches, from analysts. You simply can't replace that. And whilst there are absolutely some great technologies out there, AI will never be smart enough to replace. And the art of coaching, the expertise that is needed to use this data is always going to remain. And is always going to be a very important part of it, where those conversations need to happen. So automation is great. It definitely reduces the manual workload, which is fantastic. And it frees up analysts' time to actually analyze rather than just collecting data. It gives me more time to do that. So if I go back even probably 3 or 4 years, my role in game that I described earlier didn't exist. I didn't do that. It's only because some of the advances in technology and me having other members of my team that I can do that. So that's great. And that is a really important part of what we're doing, but there's always going to be that manual, human element that should always remain.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned about the difference between venues. You mentioned kind of the opening weekend in Nottingham, but then also, I think when you were talking about camera systems, you had some venues would maybe eventually have something and others wouldn't. How much does that play into your role? Obviously, everything you've described, all the technology, if you're at home and you can set all of that up, sounds amazing. Is that always the case? Do you have away fixtures where it's not possible to do everything you want, where even, you can't get an internet signal, or you can't put certain technology and you can't do everything you want to do in the changing room? And even if that is the case, what role does the league play really in standardisation as well? I think you've got that home away difference, but also you mentioned about a standardised video resource pool. Yeah, I'm just really interested really in the difference between teams, but also what can be done to try and bridge that gap and help to advance everything across the league really.
Yeah, so I'm really determined in that regardless of where we are, which venue we're in, I always want to provide the team the same level of service, regardless of infrastructure. How easy that is to make happen varies considerably venue to venue and place to place, but that's my goal for myself and for the team is to do that. So in some venues that's really easy because there are dedicated spaces to film from, there are gantries, there's always power, there's tables to put the copious bits of equipment on, there's lots of space and that makes my life an absolute dream. Other places, I won't mention which ones, we go to certain venues where there is no dedicated area to film from. So I've been in many a situation over the years where I am sat on 2 plastic fold down chairs next to the crowd or literally in the crowd. And I've got all the equipment around me, people coming in and out with drinks and with food and literally stepping over all the laptops and all the equipment we've got. And that makes things a lot more difficult. Not necessarily from the space perspective, although that's not great, but it's the distraction and me trying to do my role in a game with someone coming down the row with their half-eaten hot dog and a lukewarm cup of coffee certainly doesn't aid my concentration and being able to feed back effectively. So that definitely changes. I remember a game when I was with England, we played out in Australia. This is going back 10 years, and we played in a place called Bendigo. And the venue was, to put it frankly, awful. It was like a tin shed. It was temporary seating. My area to film from was just at the back of the stand. I had a pelly case stacked, or 2 pelly cases stacked on top of each other. That became my desk for my laptop. I had to, in a very tight area, set my tripod up as well, and it just kind of detracts a little from what we're trying to achieve with professionalization of the sport in different spheres. So in terms of what the league can do, well, the league are really advanced in that it's pretty unique that teams share video in sport. So mentioned earlier, every team's got access to every other team's video, which is a brilliant resource for analysis. And there are standards of filming and standards of coding that everyone's got to adhere to. But at the moment, there is no minimum operating standard for the space in which analysis has to happen, or that there has to be power and there has to be Wi-Fi access and things like that. So that definitely needs to come and is a big development area for our sport. Like I said at the start of this part, regardless of any of that, I want to be making sure I give the same output. So we're self-sufficient and we're in a strong place where we can continue the wireless coverage wherever we go because of the technology we've invested in. But I also recognise that is relatively unique in netball, and that we've got the resource, the people to help us make that happen. And other teams, other franchises don't have that luxury to go to every game with.
So without mentioning any names, do you think that's ever deliberate, in that given everything you've described about how important your role actually is and the communication you can have with players and coaches influencing the tactical outcomes or in almost real time, it seems sensible, given especially what we see in other sports of the state of some away changing rooms and some of the things that are done to kind of make life pretty horrible for visiting teams. Do you think there's any value, or does it happen? You're kind of almost even deliberately trying to restrict the facilities and equipment available to visiting PAs.
In general, netball's a pretty friendly sport. There's some very, very helpful, or the majority of people rather, are very, very helpful across the sport. Are there some elements of gamesmanship? I'm sure there probably are, and that there are probably elements in that. An example springs to mind of when I was with England. I won't say where we were, but we were away internationally, and they took real objection to us using some of the wireless technology, and they wouldn't let us plug some of our routers in, and they were basically trying to stop us giving live information down to the bench because they realised what it was. They didn't like the fact that we could do that, and so they tried to stop that. And then there was conversations at that time with the International Netball Federation about whether things like that were or weren't allowed on benches, and whether technology would or wouldn't be allowed. That's not unique to netball. The same happened in football. Mentioned earlier, 2 to 3 years ago, you didn't really see iPads and things on the bench. That's because they were banned and they weren't allowed to be down there, but things have evolved and things have changed. So in my current role in Super League, I don't think people do it deliberately because it is so much a common thing now where teams do bring analysts. That said, there are certain places, certain venues that don't make it easy and could definitely do a little bit more to enable analysis to be done in a more efficient manner. And the space is the biggest thing of that, and having a dedicated area to do that without those distractions and without hot dogs and lukewarm coffees falling all over your very expensive equipment.
The other thing you've mentioned that we haven't really touched on was GPS. Pretty much everything we've discussed falls back in some way to video, whether it's automated or manual notation. What role does GPS play? Is that just something that's interesting from what distance has each player covered, how fast are they running, how many sprints, etc.? Or are you actually trying to track the position of players on court in terms of tactical setups? And I guess linked in with all of that, is that something you're able to do away from home, or does that require kind of specific equipment to be set up, especially given that netball's an indoor sport?
Yeah, so I'll start on that bit first. Netball being an indoor sport restricts where we can use GPS. So GPS tracking needs satellites. It needs access to satellites to generate all the data. So obviously when we've got a roof over our heads indoor, that is stopped. So at Loughborough, we're really lucky in that the university has invested in a system called Catapult Clear Sky in our netball venues. And what Clear Sky does is essentially replicate satellites, but indoors. So in both of our netball venues on campus, if you ever are in them, you'll see a series of about 20 small white boxes about the size of an iPad, all high up around the venue on the walls. That is generating artificial satellites, which then allows us to collect all of the information we need as if we were outside with access to real satellites. So we don't get that anywhere else. So we can only collect that extensive data when we are at home in our venues. And when I say extensive, it is really extensive. So the units that we use for each individual player can collect or do collect live up to nearly 2,000 different physical metrics on every single player, which is a absolutely huge number of metrics. And there is no way we need all 2,000. So my job and the S&C coach's job, strength and conditioning coach's job, is to whittle down which are the most important ones that we need to be aware of. Whereas PA is traditionally technique and tactical analysis, GPS is very much on the physical side of performance, and that's why the strength and conditioning coach is so important within that. So we've got lots of things we can look at. We do look at distance covered, so we can keep an eye from a loading perspective of how far players are running in games and how intense the sessions are, the number of accelerations they do, decelerations. And we're trying ultimately to map our training sessions to be as similar as possible to our matches, and building a picture of that so we can better prepare the players physically. And then the really exciting part of that is trying to combine data sets together. So a big project I've been working on this season is taking our tech and tack data from the PA perspective, aligning all of that together with the GPS data and seeing if we can draw out anything that might help us to better understand performances again. So, for example, if an event happens on court, a player performs a certain action, is that because they're technically not good enough? Is that because it was a tactical decision that wasn't good enough? Or is there something physically spiked in their data that has forced them to do that action? So combining those data sets together in a interdisciplinary manner, getting some insight and conversation around that is really cool. And that's certainly one of the areas where PA is starting to go next. We mentioned this a little bit earlier, in delving even deeper, but using different data sets to delve into that.
Yeah, we can come on to this in a bit, but I'm amazed that this is not a full-time job and that actually, you have a full-time job teaching, and then this is another part of that, which, it sounds like about 2 people at least doing full-time jobs on its own. But yeah, just continuing that conversation from earlier where we talked through pre-match live, you mentioned that by the time players have finished their cool down, you've already got stats from that match available for them. I'm guessing if you needed to, you can run down again with your laptop just as you would at halftime. And how does that work? Would you have any role in the immediate post-match scenario, or is it something where you would wait until 1 or 2 days later and then kind of almost leave what's happened in the past to the past and start your build up to the next weekend's match? How does that all work?
The immediate aftermath of a game, result depending, is always emotionally charged. And you've just finished a really intense game of netball. There's a lot of emotions flying around. So at the end of a game, on game day, as far as my role goes, is uploading the video, sending out the outline statistics to the players in our WhatsApp group. So they've got an initial overview and they can start to make their own interpretations of that data. And the players are really good at that now. They're really good with the buy-in for that and taking responsibility on themselves for doing that, which is great. The coaches will have a lot of conversations immediately after the game. You'll see coaches, as players are cooling down, walking up and down with them and doing what we refer to as a hot debrief with the players and talking to them. In the changing rooms, once everyone's back in, when the coaches are doing their initial assessment and chats with the players, they will use some of the data and they will mention certain statistics. So did we hit our target in whatever it is we were looking at today? That will be mentioned. But that's as far as it really goes on the game day itself. 48 hours afterwards, we'll then do a full debrief. So I will then come back into our next training session, present some of the data, talk about whether we hit our targets or not. And again, myself and Vic will have had conversations before that debrief about what we want to talk about, what we want to highlight. And that comes from a data perspective and a video perspective again. That 48 hours is really important because it allows those emotions to subside a little bit. But a complication to that is, when is our next game? And sometimes we will be playing our next game 48 hours later, if it's a double header weekend. So that completely changes all of my processes and suddenly things become even busier if we have got another game in quick succession. But that's the typical way around we'll do debriefs.
Okay. And all of this is being communicated with players, coaches. You've mentioned strength and conditioning coaches. You also teach students, and you also conduct your own academic research in the area of performance analysis in sport. And communication is key within all of that. How does it differ? If you're communicating to players and coaches, how does that differ? Or how do you take the findings from academic research that communicate that in an actionable way and relatable way to players and coaches? And, really, is that something you've learned through trial and error, or is it something that can be taught to students? Just tell me a bit more about communication. How does it work? And how can we learn, really?
So the ultimate part of what I've got to do as an analyst is land the message with the people who need to know it. all of what we've just talked about is completely pointless if I can't communicate all that information over to the people who need to know it in a way that they can take it in and then that they can do something with it. So I've got a lot of software and a lot of big databases and data sets in the background and huge volumes of video. If I were to just present an enormous Excel sheet to the coaches, the players, with all due respect, they would tell me where to go and they'd probably lose interest in that very, very quickly. So for me, the most important part of being an analyst is the ability to translate messages into language, into formats, and into a convenient format, being the critical part, that they can actually understand and take that message in by. Lots and lots of different ways we can do that. I mentioned WhatsApp earlier. Our pre-match goes on a short 5-minute video. But sometimes we do in-person sessions and I will stand up and present information, or we'll put some responsibility on the players. And in small groups, they will have the responsibility to deliver some of the information as well. Language is really important within that. So we've got a common language where we all know what we are talking about. There are lots of technical terms in netball, which when I first got involved in the sport took me a long time to get to grips with. But we've all got that now, and that's critical, is that we all are talking the same language, the same tactical words we are using for things. So that's really important as well. In terms of that landing the message, we've got to do it in a way that they want to have it. We know that this generation of players now coming through need information quicker. And that's not just netball players, that's just the generation in general. Research has shown that people need information quicker. 2 clicks. If it's beyond 2 clicks, often people don't go further than that. So we need to get it to them really quickly to enable them to take that in. And they need to have short, sharp messages within that. So I've got to translate my data, my video to action. What do we know about this team? Why do they do that? Critically, how do we stop them, or how do we exploit them? I've got to get all those messages in really short, sharp formats. So lots of technology helps me do that. Some really good presentation softwares, lots of different ways we do that. Sometimes we'll do it on video, together as a group, individually. But that's the most important part of being an analyst, is landing that message. As for can you teach that or be taught that? You can. There are definitely strategies and ways to implement that. And in my academic role, when I'm teaching our MSc in performance analysis at Loughborough, that's something I talk to my students about, and I teach them the different technologies that can help with that. But of course, they've all got to be within the context of the sport and the confines they're working within. I would say that the most important part is knowing your people and relationship building. If you know a player, a coach, what makes them tick, how they want information, we can then make it bespoke to them so that they truly take that information in the best way. No 2 players, no 2 coaches are the same. And of course, they want information in different ways sometimes. And that's part of my job, is to make that bespoke to them so that we give every coach, every player, the opportunity to have information in their preferred format, so that they can take that in and hopefully do something with it and positively impact the outcome of the game.
If anyone's listening to this and is inspired and they want to pursue a career in performance analysis, other than the master's course at Loughborough in sport performance analysis that you've mentioned, is there anything else you can recommend even before pursuing a master's that anyone can do to find out a bit more or gain some experience?
Yeah, there's some really good resources out there. A couple of years ago, I did a series of 4 video sessions, which are out on YouTube, which is a deep dive into performance analysis and an overview of some of our technologies and a real good insight to some of what I've talked about today. So searching for Learn with Lightning on YouTube, and you'll quickly see the performance analysis series on there would be a great starting place to do that. There's also lots of other good webinars and resources out there that people can engage with. The Training Ground Guru is one such, which is a great resource and website where people can take a bit more of a look. And then shameless plug here, but I recently wrote a book in performance analysis as well, which goes into a lot of detail about some of the processes I've talked about today. So that's called Professional Practice in Performance Analysis, and that gives lots of examples, talks through all the technologies and things I've mentioned today, and coaching and loads of really cool parts. So that'll be a good read as well if people are getting to grips with this area a little bit more, just to give it a deep dive into the area and a lot more detail.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Even as someone who's been involved in netball my whole life, I've learned a lot through this conversation. So yeah, thanks. It's been really interesting. I thought I was busy before this, but I'm slightly reevaluating that and realizing, yeah, maybe I'm not as busy as I thought I was after listening to everything you do in the week alongside your academic role, research, family, writing books, communicating with that, however many different people, different messages in different formats. But yeah, it's been really, really interesting. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Thanks, Andrew.
Pleasure. No problem at all. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Experts in Sport podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, then please contact me, Martin Foster, at m.foster@loughborough.ac.uk. Thanks for listening. See you next time.